Hello and good morning everyone, and welcome to our Secunia webinar today. So we are joined by Lee Morton, who will be going through the webinar with you.
Okay, good morning everyone. Okay, so I'm here to present automating patch management with Secunia CSI. But before I kind of go into exactly how we help to provide some automation for the patch management, I'd like to look at just briefly the reasons why we're looking to help with the automation. And the main reason is what we're looking to do is actually reduce the time to patch. And it's quite an important metric. And what I've got here is a graphic from Microsoft Security Intelligence Report. And what we have across the x-axis is period of time, and on the y-axis we've got the number of detected exploits that are actually targeting this particular vulnerability. So what we have at the beginning of this timeline is the first report of public exploitation. So this is the first instance of something being detected that is actually trying to exploit this vulnerability. And then over the course of a few days, Adobe gets a sample of this malware, so they can analyze it. And then what we get on the 15th of April is we get Adobe's public disclosure of the vulnerability, so when they actually announce it and it becomes public knowledge, and that coincides with an actual patch available for the Flash player. So this is typically good disclosure process, that it's not publicly out there until the patch is available to fix it. So what we've got on the X timeline there is we've got a line of red, and that's to indicate the 0-day exploit timeline. So we can see that we are above 0, so this was a 0-day exploit. But as you can see, it's only a very small blip. So this would typically be quite common, just a small handful of very targeted exploits against this vulnerability. And then what we see immediately after that is we get another blip. It's become public knowledge, so we do see an increase in exploits trying to target this because the patch has only just become available, and therefore the likelihood of people having patched that quickly will be very remote. So there's a high potential for these exploits to be successful. But then what we see is after a couple of days, it drops to almost nothing, very, very few, for almost a month period. And again, this is typically quite common as well. So after the initial quick spike, we have almost no activity. So what this is kind of showing us is that if we follow a lot of compliance type guidelines, and we can apply the patch within 30 days of it becoming available, that the number of potential exploits that will are able to target us within that period where we weren't patched is very minimal. And that if we can actually have that patch applied within that time period, that then we become immune to these exploits. When we've applied that patch, we've fixed that vulnerability, we've closed that door. And so all the following exploits are not able to successfully exploit that vulnerability. But unfortunately what happens is because patching is not necessarily so easy through a vulnerability process, that it often isn't. So what we then see is that beyond that time period, we see an extra spike, a much larger spike than what we had before. But even then it tails off a bit. But then at about the 2-month time period, when more people have had a chance to look at the patch, reverse the patch, look at the exploit, people have started writing exploits and then selling those exploits to other people, and the cost of those exploits to buy becomes cheaper. We see huge increases in the number of detected exploits targeting that vulnerability. And unfortunately, when we're not so good at applying the patches through difficulties, if we haven't applied the patch and we haven't actually closed the door on that vulnerability, these exploits have the potential to be successful and successfully exploit. So if the other security, defenses, antivirus, etc., do not actually detect all of these exploits, then there is potential for those exploits to become successful and successfully exploit that vulnerability. And in this case, this was a very serious vulnerability with remotely exploitable with system access, so essential control of machine. So if we move on to the next graphic, what we've got here is kind of the fact of where Secunia are looking compared to a lot of the market. So what we have here is the market for public vulnerability, the market share verified and reported vulnerabilities. So what we can see here is that Secunia is essentially one of three major players in this space, with the rest of the market share made up by multiples of a lot smaller vendors. But one of the things that we've got here is that a lot of the household security names do not appear in this list. And that is quite simply because they tend to target on the exploits, detection of the exploits themselves, whereas what Secunia look at is the actual vulnerabilities and then helping you to get that patch that fixes the vulnerability, fixes the root cause. As I said, if we close the vulnerability, then we've closed the door on these exploits. They cannot successfully exploit the vulnerability which they're actually targeting. So today we're looking at the corporate software inspector. So it sits amongst a small handful of Secunia solutions, but the Secunia corporate software inspector is able to scan your machines, tell you where the vulnerable applications are, help through the patching, and then integrate to existing deployment solutions in order to get that patch out there and then verify that that patch has actually been applied. So one of the vendors that we work very closely with is Microsoft. So we are the first Vulnerability Security Alliance partner for Microsoft. We integrate seamlessly with WSUS System Center 2007 as well as 2012. And we're now installed in the Microsoft Technology Centers, so anyone going along there can have the solution demoed within Microsoft's environment as well. So how do we actually help to automate and simplify this process of getting the patches out there? Well, if we look at the vulnerability management lifecycle here, we go from a process of trying to support the lifecycle, trying to support the vulnerability management process. So the first thing we have in the vulnerability lifecycle is we have discovery. We need to find out what's out there and actually discover our vulnerabilities. So we do this within the CSI by scanning. So we have various different scan methods, but our intention is to go out and actually find out what you have. Build up a bit of essentially an inventory of your applications and then correlate it to our vulnerability research database. So we have a database of over 50,000 advisories covering thousands upon thousands upon thousands of vulnerabilities, and we can compare that against what you actually have to then be able to tell you via the results which applications you have, where you have them, whether they're insecure and have known vulnerabilities, whether they're end of life with known vulnerabilities, whether they're just end of life, or whether you're actually running supported secure versions of that software. And along with that, we've got the information about any vulnerability. So it's verified, it's independently analysed by Secunia, so you can go, you can see for a vulnerability what the application is, how many endpoints are affected, what the criticality of that vulnerability is, what the vendors scored that vulnerability at, what Secunia has scored that vulnerability at. And what that allows you to do is then do the assessment part of the vulnerability management lifecycle, for you to see what you have and then decide how you're actually going to deal with that. And we give you the information to prioritize, so that when we come around to the remediation phase, which is where we need the actual patch that's going to fix the vulnerability, if you've got multiples, you can then prioritize and choose in what order and how you're actually going to apply these patches. And then what we have within the system is for over 300 applications, we've provided the ability to basically next through a four-step wizard to actually create a package and publish that package into your deployment tool of choice. So it can be simple as next, but there are multiple configurable steps. So you can also tailor that package as well. And behind the scenes, a lot of testing has been done on those packages. So authenticity of those packages has been checked. They've been passed through multiple malware virus scan engines to make sure it's clean. It's been tested, the upgrade process, It's any extra adware and toolbars or bundling of other software. If there's no breach of license agreement, all of that's been stripped out so that you're not potentially introducing new vulnerabilities, which can sometimes occur. And it's been tested that it does actually fix all the vulnerabilities that it's meant to fix. So all of that has kind of been done ahead of time to save you the time and effort of doing that. And then once it's been deployed, we then need to verify. We need to make sure that the patches have been successfully applied and that you are now running the secure versions of the software. And we do that by simply scheduling our scan so that we're re-scanning those endpoints again, making sure that they've got the secure version. But of course, the vulnerability landscape does not stay static. The endpoints don't necessarily stay static. You may install new software, you may remove software, there may be new vulnerabilities. So that scan, of course, essentially is then going back round into the discovery phase, which is then updating on the results and would become a cyclical process. So when we've looked at creating the CSI and supporting the vulnerability management process, we've narrowed it down into four pillars, four key components. And this is where we have coined the phrase complete patch management, because a lot of the time when we think about traditional patch management, it's about just, here's some patches, you'll be able to put them into the deployment solution. But if you've got no targeting, if you've got no scanning, if you've got no intelligence feeding that process, you don't know which patches you need, you don't know where you need them. And you may have to do a lot of that testing still yourself on those patches. So Secunia have broken it down into these four key components. Vulnerability intelligence. So Secunia have their own research company. Well, they are a vulnerability research company. They've got their own research team of security analysts. They independently assess every potential vulnerability to verify that it is a true vulnerability, give it its own independent scoring assessment. And what that does is it tells us when applications have gone vulnerable. And the CSI, from this perspective, supports in excess of 23,000 different applications. So by far the most comprehensive. But you also have the ability to ask them to include something which isn't already in there. It doesn't happen very often, but if you do have something that's not in there, you can actually ask them, and they will, in 72 hours, actually add that into the database and be monitoring that from that point. So we then have the scanning, as we mentioned. We need to go and find out what's installed on the endpoints. We need to know specific applications, specific versions, which we can then correlate with that vulnerability intelligence to give you the results. But we're also, from that point, getting the paths, finding out where it's installed on the different endpoints. And all of that then feeds into creating the package to actually deploy the patch. So we know where that package needs to be deployed to. We know which machines need that package. We know which packages you need based on what software you have that's end of life or insecure. It's all come from the previous elements. And then once we've got that package, we then integrate with your existing deployment solution so that your existing workflows can remain unaltered. So if many people are already patching Microsoft through WSUS SCCM, there's typically a process already in place there. What we're doing is encapsulating everything else and feeding into that process. So by working with the Secunia solution, you can carry on doing exactly what you were doing before, but now you're covering all the other vulnerabilities as well. So if I now switch across, I can show you how that works within the console very briefly. So this is at a very high level overview. If anyone wants to kind of go much more into detail, then please feel free to contact us and we can do more bespoke one-to-ones where we can go into specific requirements, etc. But at the very high level, we've got scanning. So we've got different scan methods for different environments. This can be mixed and matched within an environment, but essentially we can scan across the network from the console itself. we can deploy very small agents on endpoints around different parts of the network and then schedule scanning across the network from those. We can install a very small, lightweight agent onto endpoints themselves to do local scanning on the machine, which then has the advantage that that scanning can then be mobile with that device. So if it leaves the corporate perimeter, the scanning can still be done. We can integrate the home version into the actual corporate console as well, if that's desired. So we can mix and match any of these, but essentially every single method we're looking for any .exe, .dll, .ocx file that exists on the machine, and we're getting the vendor, the product version metadata, and of course where it actually exists on that machine. And then we can then correlate that against the vulnerability database, which is Secunia's intellectual property. It's their own, and we report this in the form of smart groups. So these are essentially predefined views of your vulnerability application results. So we can view things on a host perspective, and we can see per host how many insecure end-of-life applications, how many patched, which we roll into a system score, which is kind of a ratio metric to allow you to compare between different machines and give you a very quick heads up about the vulnerability status of that endpoint. We can drill into that if we wish to see the list of applications and then see specifically the end-of-life and insecure applications. We can look at things from a product perspective, so maybe I just want to see all my insecure products across the network. So these are products that are still supported but have known vulnerabilities. So each one of these is a vulnerable version. I can see very quickly the criticality rating of that vulnerability, and if I want to dive into the vulnerability itself, I can actually see the Secunia advisory. So I can see how old this vulnerability is. Again, off our graphic, the longer it's been available. We've got these common spikes, and we can see how likely we are to be exploited and targeted on that vulnerability. We can see what the impact is of the vulnerability being successfully exploited, where it's exploitable from, and the solution status. In this case, it's vendor patched. So there is a patch available. And on our research last year, about 79% of vulnerabilities had a patch available on the day of disclosure. Okay, so nearly 80% you could have patched on the day that it was disclosed. That's not necessarily what we're aiming for. No one's really going to do that, but the solution is typically there. The patch is often available to actually close the vulnerability and close the root cause. So we've got all the individual vulnerabilities and all the information about the vulnerabilities. So again, this is the kind of information you can use to decide how quickly do we, how vulnerable are we to this, how risky is this particular vulnerability to us. And we can also do it from the advisory or the vulnerability perspective. And we can create our own groups for these. We have some predefined ones, but we can create our own. And by creating our own, we can then use those to filter down dashboards. We can use them for reports, and we can also create notifications based on these. So we can get the console itself to be checking these groups for certain conditions on a time period that we wish, and then having it send out an email or send out an SMS notification to the people that need to be aware that this condition's occurred. But all of this, which is all being done purely from that scan, then feeds into the actual patching. So what we have here is a dynamic list of updates. So it's dynamic because it's based purely on the scan results and the vulnerability intelligence. So what we're offering here are the ability to create update packages for applications which are known to be end of life, known to be vulnerable, and exist, according to the scan results, somewhere on your infrastructure. Okay, so if the vulnerability intelligence changes, this list changes. If the scan results change, this list gets updated. So it's constantly evolving. Again, we've got all the information on the vulnerabilities. how long ago this was detected within our environment, the criticality rating, how many number of affected machines. We can go into the advisory. I can even use some of my smart groups. So I've got here where I've filtered down a smart group to a set number of high-risk assets and then showing the insecure applications from those. And maybe I want to target those first, so I can select that smart group and it filters down my patches accordingly. And in terms of actually creating the package, I can simply right-click, create update package. In this case, there's multiple languages, so I can choose a language. Because we're dynamic, it's just warning my scan results are a little bit old, so basically I should do another scan first, but this is just a demo system. And at this point, this is a Secunia provided package, so I could just next, and publish this, and I would have a working package published in this case through to WSUS, which can then be picked up by the clients, that will be picked up by the clients that need it, and it's a package that's known to fix the vulnerabilities. However, I can also tailor this at every step of the way, change names, etc. In this case, I can actually do this installation as a clean install, which will actually remove the existing version and install this one afresh. I can tailor the install and remove the desktop shortcuts, end-user license agreements, turn off ads, turn off purchase options, disable flash, prevent the anonymous usage statistics, etc., etc. And these will be saved, these preferences, when we've created this package. So if we create another one, it will actually prompt us and say, would you like to use the same settings? And if we say yes, it will pre-populate all of these again for us. We can change the minimum version. So if we've got multiple versions out there, we can do some tailoring and maybe create one single package to update all our versions of Adobe and bring them all onto one standard secure version. We've got the installation paths for the applicability. So again, this has come from the scanning. So if I have an application installed in non-default locations in various parts of the network, because we've scanned, we know that it's installed in those different paths, and so those paths are automatically populated here, which means that when we go to publish and create this package, it is being targeted and is relevant to all the endpoints that actually need this update to fix those vulnerabilities. And then when we click next, we've got some extra targeting, so we can go for architecture, we can flag that this needs a reboot, etc. And then when we hit publish, it pulls the update, wraps it up with the applicability, the execution scripts, etc., digitally signs it, and then pushes it into the deployment tool of choice, ready for deployment. And then just to close off, of course, we've then got the scanning on the schedule that is then going back, scanning those endpoints, and if those packages have been successfully deployed, we will now pick up the secure version, and in the results, the application will move from insecure into patched. And the package in the list of packages will disappear and not be seen within here, because you've now got that package already in the system to fix that vulnerability. So that's very, very high level, hopefully informative. At this point, I'll hand back to Sarah now, and I'll take any questions that have come through.
Brilliant, thank you, Lee. Okay, so as mentioned previously, if you could just pop any questions you have into the questions box, and Lee will answer those for you shortly. Okay, so we have a question here from Chris. So he's asked, is he right that Secunia doesn't actually deploy the patches, but you have to use WSUS or SECM to do this? i.e. it doesn't actually automate the deployment of patches.
Okay, that's right. We don't push the package ourselves. We go through, we choose a method of integration with existing deployment. But what we are doing is a lot of the work in patching is actually knowing which patches you need, getting those patches, going through the whole vulnerability process says that you should test the authenticity of the patch, you should check that the patch is clean, you need to test the upgrade of the patch to make sure it works. Ideally, when you get the patches, you don't want any of the extra bumps that might come with the patch, because we've seen instances in the past where you may do something like an Adobe update and it tries to give you Chrome, and the version of Chrome it's giving you is actually an insecure version of Chrome. So on one hand you fix an Adobe vulnerability, and then on the other hand you introduce Chrome vulnerabilities. So it's by doing the scan, all we need to do to get the package is to come to the Secunia packaging system. If you don't want to do any tailoring, you can simply next, and then that package would be within the WSUS. We would then be subject to the same approval that you have with WSUS, and then the clients would simply pick up the non-Microsoft packages through the WSUS as they would the standard Microsoft updates. But it means that the existing work process doesn't have to be changed. You're not, apart from the scan happening with Secunia and just going through that wizard, you're not doing anything in addition to what you were already doing before.
Thanks, Lee. So we have another question here from Simon, who's asked, does Secunia have the ability to uninstall old versions of Java?
It all comes down to the functionality of the installers themselves. Let me just see if I have a Java one here. I don't have a Java one on here. Some have the clean install option. In fact, actually, on the latest packages, there is an optional parameter. I don't have it on here to remove previous versions. There is. I remember seeing it now. So it's not quite the same as some of these. Some of these where we've got an uninstallable column, it means that we can actually right-click and create an uninstall package, which is initially where I was going down. But on the Java packages, like within the Adobe Reader, we have optional parameters in here. On the Java package, there is an optional parameter to remove previous versions.
Okay, thanks, Lee. So we have a question from Cliff, who's asked, how long does it take for Secunia to test a patch before releasing to customers?
In my experience, I typically see it's within 24 hours of public disclosure and the patch being available from the vendor. Absolutely right. If you were literally monitoring from the second that Adobe released it, it wouldn't be there within the CSI. But then we can't do all of that testing. If we're going to do all of that testing, we do need that bit of a time period. But it's normally there within 24-hour period. And kind of the flip side is you should be doing all of that. If you weren't using Secunia, you should be doing all of that testing, etc. Anyway. And the question is, would you be doing all of that testing that's gone in within that kind of time period yourself? And for most people, that's just resource that's not available and not done. So yeah, normally within 24 hours, the package will be in the system.
Okay, and we have a couple of questions actually from David, who said, how can you push PACAX to remote clients over the WAN? And he's also said, can you use this to prep images of OS to keep them up to date prior to deployment to new PCs?
Okay, so you just repeat the first question again for me, please?
So it says here, how can you push PACAX to remote clients over the WAN? That might be...
Might be packages.
Yeah.
The thing with Secunia is we go from an integration into existing deployment tools, so we do not ourselves push the packages. we publish them essentially and put them into the deployment tool of choice, and then it's the deployment tool that actually dictates how they get to the endpoint. In terms of OSs, we do cover OSs from being able to tell you whether they're end of life, etc., but we don't package actual operating systems. We cover the applications on them.
Okay, thanks, Lee. So I think that's all the questions we have today. So as mentioned previously, if you could please fill out the critique form at the end, we'd really appreciate that, and you can say if you would like some more information or a one-to-one webinar with Lee, also pop that in there. Okay, so thank you everyone today, and thank you so much, Lee, for presenting.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Okay, and enjoy the rest of your Friday. Thank you.